He believed one cruel word spoken in Korean would remain a secret forever. He never imagined the woman he humiliated understood every syllable, or that the man who loved her had heard them all. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe every person deserves respect regardless of their job, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Now, back to Naomi Carter. The Grand Meridian Hotel glittered beneath a sea of crystal chandeliers, every polished marble floor reflecting golden light like liquid glass. Soft violin music floated through the ballroom as CEOs, diplomats, celebrities, and billionaires exchanged handshakes worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Waiters moved silently between tables dressed in immaculate black uniforms, carrying silver trays lined with imported wine and handcrafted desserts. It was a room built for power, wealth, and appearances. Naomi Carter belonged to none of those worlds. Or so everyone believed. She adjusted the sleeve of her perfectly pressed waitress uniform before lifting a bottle of vintage Bordeaux from her silver tray. Her movements were calm, elegant, almost effortless. Years of working luxury events had taught her one simple lesson. The best service was nearly invisible. She approached the largest table in the ballroom. 8 executives surrounded Ethan Caldwell, one of America's youngest self-made billionaires. His tailored navy tuxedo fit perfectly, his platinum watch caught the chandelier's glow, and every person seated beside him laughed just a little too quickly whenever he spoke. Money had that effect. It made arrogance sound entertaining. "Another glass," Ethan said casually without looking at Naomi. "Certainly, sir." She leaned forward and poured the wine with practiced precision. Not a single drop spilled. Ethan glanced toward the Korean executive seated beside him before a slow, amused smile spread across his face. Then, switching effortlessly into Korean, he spoke just loudly enough for those at the table to hear. "Don't hand it to me." A few executives looked confused. The Korean executive smiled. Ethan continued. "Let it leave the bottle on the table." A short laugh circled the table. Someone lowered his head to hide a grin. Another quietly raised his wine glass. The single word hung in the air. Not she. Not the waitress. Just it. Naomi heard every syllable. For the smallest fraction of a second, her fingers tightened around the bottle. Then they relaxed. Her expression never changed. Years earlier, before life had brought her back to New York, she had spent nearly 4 years living and studying in Seoul. Korean had become part of her daily life, as familiar as English itself. She understood every insult Ethan had just delivered. She also understood something even more important. Cruel people always revealed themselves when they believed no one could understand them. Without saying a word, she finished pouring the wine. "Enjoy your evening, sir." She stepped away with the same quiet dignity she had carried into the room. Ethan watched her leave and chuckled again. "I almost feel sorry for it," he said in Korean. The men around him laughed a little louder this time. None of them noticed the ballroom entrance opening. A tall Korean man dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit stepped inside with calm, measured confidence. His warm golden skin reflected beneath the chandelier light, while his dark eyes surveyed the room with the quiet awareness of someone accustomed to danger. Daniel Brooks had attended hundreds of galas. Tonight, he noticed only one thing: the woman carrying the silver tray. Then he heard Ethan's final sentence in flawless Korean. Daniel stopped walking. His expression did not change. He simply watched Naomi continue serving the guests as though nothing had happened. Then, without saying a single word, he quietly turned and walked away. Everyone assumed he had lost interest. Only one man standing near the entrance noticed the subtle movement of Daniel's hand as it slowly closed into a fist. Sometimes the most dangerous decision isn't to fight back. It's to remain silent while someone you love misunderstands your silence. Daniel Brooks never looked back as he walked away from the ballroom. At least, that was what everyone believed. The polished marble corridor outside the Grand Meridian stretched beneath warm wall sconces, its silence a sharp contrast to the laughter echoing behind the ballroom doors. Hotel staff hurried past carrying fresh linens and polished silver trays, barely noticing the tall Korean businessman who had stopped beside a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city skyline. Min Jae, Daniel's longtime head of security, appeared beside him without making a sound. "You heard everything." It wasn't a question. Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the lights scattered across Manhattan. I did. Min Jae waited. He had protected Daniel for almost 15 years. He had seen negotiations with cartel leaders, meetings with presidents, wars between criminal organizations that never appeared in newspapers. But he had never seen Daniel leave after hearing the woman he loved insulted. You want me to remove him? Min Jae finally asked. Daniel answered quietly. No. Cancel his invitation to future events? No. Inform the hotel? Daniel slowly shook his head. He still believes no one understands Korean. His voice remained calm. Good. Min Jae frowned. Daniel turned toward him. Tonight isn't about what Ethan said. It's about discovering who everyone else chooses to become. Back inside the ballroom, Naomi continued serving guests exactly as she always had. She collected empty glasses, replaced silverware, smiled politely, thanked guests for attending. No one looking at her would guess she had just been stripped of her humanity with a single word. She had learned long ago that pain did not always deserve an audience. Years earlier, when she first arrived in Seoul as a university exchange student, she had struggled with the language, the customs, and the loneliness of being far from home. An elderly Korean woman who owned the neighborhood cafe where Naomi studied every afternoon had once told her something she never forgot. When people speak badly about others, they're usually describing themselves. At 20 years old, Naomi thought those words sounded beautiful. At 27, she knew they were true. She reached into her apron pocket and unconsciously touched the thin silver chain resting beneath her uniform. Hidden under the fabric hung the engagement ring Daniel had placed on her finger 8 months earlier. No one in the ballroom knew it existed. That had been Daniel's decision. He had explained it to her one quiet evening over homemade ramen in his penthouse kitchen. My enemies don't attack me. They attack the people I love. Naomi had understood. She agreed without hesitation. If hiding their engagement meant keeping both of them safe, she would wear the ring beneath her uniform for as long as necessary. Tonight, however, for the first time, the chain felt unexpectedly heavy. Across the ballroom, Ethan Caldwell leaned comfortably into his chair, completely unaware that the man he had unknowingly insulted had not left the hotel. He raised another glass of wine. Interesting, he said in Korean to the executive beside him. It understands more than I expected. The executive gave an uneasy laugh. I think you've made your point. Ethan smiled. I haven't even started. Near the ballroom entrance, Daniel quietly returned. This time, he remained in the shadows. No guest noticed him. No executive greeted him. His attention stayed fixed on Naomi. Min Jae stepped closer. Boss. Daniel never looked away. Tell every member of our security detail one thing. What? No one interferes. Min Jae hesitated. Not even if he insults Miss Carter again. Daniel's expression remained unreadable. Especially then. He wasn't walking away from Naomi. He was giving Ethan one final opportunity to reveal exactly who he truly was before the entire room. And somewhere beyond the glow of the crystal chandeliers, fate quietly prepared the moment that would change every life inside the ballroom forever. The cruelest people rarely begin with their worst behavior. They test the room first, searching for silence they can mistake for permission. Inside the Grand Meridian Ballroom, nothing seemed different. Crystal glasses clinked together. The orchestra eased into another elegant melody. Servers glided between tables carrying silver trays lined with handcrafted desserts, fresh coffee, and bottles of imported champagne. Guests laughed beneath the golden glow of the chandeliers, discussing investment funds, luxury developments, and private acquisitions as though the evening were perfectly ordinary. Only one person understood that something had already changed. Naomi Carter. She carried another tray toward Ethan Caldwell's table with the same graceful posture she had maintained all evening. Her shoulders remained relaxed, her breathing steady. Years of working in luxury hospitality had taught her that professionalism was often the strongest shield a person could wear. As she placed a dessert before one of the executives, Ethan glanced toward the Korean businessman seated beside him. So, he said casually in Korean. It actually understood me. The executive shifted uncomfortably. I think you've had enough fun. Ethan smiled. I'm only curious. He watched Naomi carefully. I want to know how long it can pretend. A quiet laugh escaped one of the younger investors. Another looked down at his plate. No one challenged Ethan. Naomi heard every word. She gently adjusted a dessert spoon before speaking in flawless English. Would anyone care for fresh coffee? Every guest nodded politely. No trace of emotion crossed her face. That calm unsettled Ethan more than anger ever could. He had expected embarrassment, perhaps tears, at the very least, some sign that his words had reached their target. Instead, the young waitress continued treating every guest with equal courtesy, including him. It felt like losing a game he thought he controlled. As Naomi turned to leave, Ethan spoke again in Korean, louder this time. I've seen paintings with more personality. Another uncomfortable silence settled over the table. The Korean executive finally sighed. Ethan, she's working. Leave her alone. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I'm complimenting her. Furniture isn't expected to have personality either. This time, no one laughed. Across the ballroom, Daniel Brooks observed every expression. Not only Ethan's, everyone's. He watched the executives who smiled politely, the ones who lowered their eyes, the ones who pretended not to hear. He wasn't measuring cruelty. He was measuring courage. Min Jae stood beside him with folded arms. You've seen enough. Daniel answered without looking away. Not yet. Ethan is revealing himself. Min Jae frowned. What about everyone else? Daniel's voice became almost a whisper. They're revealing themselves too. Back at the table, Naomi returned carrying a silver coffee service. She poured each cup with quiet precision. When she reached Ethan, he deliberately left his cup just out of comfortable reach. She leaned slightly forward. He smiled. Then, in Korean, he spoke again. Careful. It wouldn't be the first thing it spilled. Naomi straightened. She looked directly into Ethan's eyes for the first time all evening. There was no anger in her expression, only quiet dignity. I hope your coffee is exactly the way you like it, sir. Her voice remained warm, respectful, completely sincere. Then she moved to the next guest. The older Korean executive watched her leave before turning slowly toward Ethan. You know, my grandmother cleaned houses for 30 years. Ethan shrugged. So if she'd heard you tonight. The executive paused. She would have been ashamed of me for sitting here. Those words lingered over the table. One investor quietly pushed back his chair. Another checked his phone, searching for an excuse to leave the conversation. For the first time all evening, Ethan noticed something unfamiliar. The room was beginning to change. Not because Daniel Brooks had spoken, but because one woman's quiet dignity was forcing everyone else to choose what kind of person they wanted to be. And across the ballroom, Daniel slipped one hand inside his tailored jacket, his fingers closing gently around the small velvet ring box he had carried with him since the beginning of the evening. A room does not become dangerous when cruel words are spoken. It becomes dangerous when decent people decide to pretend they never heard them. The evening moved toward its final course. Soft piano music replaced the orchestra as hotel staff wheeled elegant dessert carts across the ballroom. Crystal glasses shimmered beneath the chandeliers, and conversations returned cautiously to business, though an invisible tension lingered beneath every polite smile. Naomi Carter lifted a silver tray carrying espresso cups and handcrafted chocolate soufflés. Her breathing was steady, her smile unchanged. Only the faint pressure of the hidden engagement ring resting beneath her uniform reminded her that Daniel was somewhere inside the hotel. She had seen him leave, or at least, she thought she had. Ethan Caldwell watched her approach once again. Something about her composure irritated him more with every passing minute. Most people broke eventually. They defended themselves, raised their voices, showed hurt. Naomi had done none of those things. She simply continued treating him with the same professionalism she offered every other guest. To Ethan, that felt almost like defiance. As she gently placed an espresso cup before him, he spoke again in Korean. So, it thinks dignity comes from pretending not to hear. A younger executive shifted uncomfortably. Ethan, seriously, enough. Ethan ignored him. He slowly looked Naomi up and down before speaking another sentence. I wonder if it even knows what respect looks like. Naomi carefully poured fresh coffee into his cup. Not a single drop spilled. When she finished, she gave the same courteous smile. I hope everything is to your satisfaction, sir. Then she turned to leave. Ethan leaned back in his chair. No. His voice carried across the nearby tables. My shoes. Naomi stopped. She turned politely. I'm sorry, sir. My shoes. He glanced toward the polished leather beneath the table. They've picked up dust. Several executives immediately understood what he was doing. One quietly closed his eyes. Another stared into his untouched coffee. No one wanted to witness what came next. Naomi looked down. The shoes reflected the ballroom lights perfectly. There wasn't a speck of dust on them. She raised her eyes again. "I don't believe they need attention, sir." Ethan smiled, then kneeled down and checked more carefully. Silence. The entire section of the ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Nearby conversations faded. Even the pianist hesitated before continuing the melody. Naomi stood perfectly still. For just a moment, she remembered her grandmother's voice. Never allow someone else's pride to make you forget your own. She folded both hands calmly in front of her apron. "I'm here to serve food and beverages. My position doesn't include polishing guests' shoes." Her tone remained gentle, respectful, without even a trace of sarcasm. Those words landed harder than any insult could have. Ethan's smile disappeared. No one had ever refused him without fear. Across the ballroom, Daniel Brooks slowly exhaled. His dark eyes never left Naomi. Min Jae stepped beside him. "Boss." Daniel opened the inside pocket of his tailored jacket. His fingers wrapped around the familiar velvet ring box. "Is this enough?" For several seconds, Daniel said nothing. Then he watched Ethan rise slowly from his chair. The billionaire straightened his tuxedo jacket before taking 2 deliberate steps toward Naomi. He smiled again. This time, there was no humor left in it, only wounded pride. He switched back to Korean. "If it won't kneel, perhaps it should remember who pays its salary." Naomi understood every word. She also understood that nearly everyone in the room had begun watching. Without raising her voice, without lowering her eyes, she answered in perfect Korean for the very first time that evening. "My salary pays for my work. My dignity was never for sale." The ballroom froze. The Korean executives stared at her in complete disbelief. Coffee cups stopped halfway to waiting lips. Ethan's confident expression cracked. And across the polished marble floor, Daniel Brooks quietly closed the velvet ring box in his hand before beginning to walk toward the center of the ballroom, knowing the moment he had waited for had finally arrived. Ironically, the moment Ethan Caldwell finally heard the truth was the exact moment he realized he had been the only person in the room who understood nothing. Silence settled over the ballroom. Not the ordinary silence between conversations. A heavier silence. The kind that appears when every person instinctively knows history is about to divide itself into a before and an after. Naomi stood exactly where she had spoken those flawless Korean words. "My salary pays for my work. My dignity was never for sale." Her voice had never risen. Yet somehow it echoed louder than every laugh Ethan had enjoyed all evening. Ethan stared at her. "You?" His confidence wavered for the first time. "You speak Korean?" Naomi met his eyes calmly. "I've understood every word you've said since the first glass of wine." The sentence struck harder than any public accusation. Several executives lowered their heads. One quietly rubbed his forehead. Another whispered something under his breath that sounded very much like regret. Ethan searched desperately for another joke, another clever remark, anything that could restore control. Nothing came. Then, a slow rhythm of footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Every head turned. Daniel Brooks walked toward Naomi without hesitation. His tailored black suit seemed almost untouched by the light surrounding him. His expression remained calm. Not cold, not angry, simply resolved. He never looked at Ethan. Not once. Instead, he stopped directly in front of Naomi. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The ballroom disappeared around them. Daniel noticed the faint outline of the silver chain beneath her uniform. The same chain he had clasped around her neck 8 months earlier. The one carrying the engagement ring they had agreed to keep hidden. He reached forward carefully. His movements were slow enough that no one felt threatened. Naomi looked into his eyes. She already knew what he was about to do. "Daniel." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't have to." He smiled gently. "I should have done this much sooner." With careful fingers, Daniel lifted the delicate silver chain over her head. The tiny diamond engagement ring slid into the palm of his hand. Hundreds of guests watched in complete silence. Several hotel employees covered their mouths. Even the pianist quietly lowered his hands from the keys. Daniel looked at the ring for only a second. Then he took Naomi's left hand. "I'm sorry." His voice carried enough warmth to soften every corner of the room. I believed hiding our engagement was protecting you. His thumb gently brushed her fingers. I never imagined it would also hide how much you deserve to be honored. A tear escaped Naomi's eye before she could stop it. Daniel carefully placed the ring back onto her finger. Not beneath a uniform. Not beneath a necklace. Exactly where it belonged. The diamond immediately caught the golden light pouring from the chandeliers. A soft gasp rippled across the ballroom. Daniel continued holding her hand. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a dramatic speech. He simply turned toward the guests. I'd like everyone here to meet the woman I intend to spend my life with. He looked back at Naomi. My fiancé. The single word transformed the room. Hotel staff who had spent months working beside Naomi stared in astonishment. Executives exchanged stunned glances. The Korean businessman finally understood why Daniel had remained silent. Not because he was indifferent, because he had been waiting for the truth to reveal itself completely. Only then did Daniel slowly turn toward Ethan Caldwell. Their eyes met for the first time that evening. Daniel spoke in calm, flawless Korean. You kept calling someone it. He paused, then gently intertwined his fingers with Naomi's. You should know her name. This is Naomi Carter. The woman you tried to humiliate. The woman I love. Ethan's face lost every trace of color. Around him, chairs shifted quietly as several executives instinctively pushed back from the table, no longer wanting to be seated beside the man whose arrogance had just collapsed beneath the weight of one simple introduction. Ironically, the man who had spent the evening deciding another person's worth was about to discover that his own reputation depended entirely on the people still willing to stand beside him. No one applauded. No one whispered. The Grand Meridian Ballroom remained perfectly still as Daniel Brooks stood beside Naomi Carter, their hands gently intertwined beneath the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers. The silence itself carried weight. Ethan Caldwell forced a strained smile. Mr. Brooks. I had no idea. Daniel regarded him with calm, unreadable eyes. I know. Those two words somehow made the room even quieter. Ethan swallowed. If I had known she was your fiancé, Daniel interrupted softly, would you have treated her differently? Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Daniel nodded once. That's exactly the problem. His voice never rose. You don't believe every person deserves respect. You believe only important people do. Several executives lowered their heads. Daniel slowly turned away from Ethan and looked around the ballroom instead. His gaze rested briefly on every table. I have a question. Nobody moved. If Naomi had never known Korean, would anyone here have told her what happened? No one answered. The older Korean executive who had defended Naomi earlier quietly closed his eyes. A woman from a European investment firm looked down at her folded hands. The banquet manager stood frozen near the service entrance. Daniel spoke again. I don't blame people for being imperfect. I blame them for becoming comfortable with cruelty. His words settled over the room like falling snow. Gentle. Unavoidable. Chairman William Hahn slowly stood from his table. The elderly businessman adjusted his jacket before walking toward Daniel. He bowed respectfully. Mr. Brooks, our board has been discussing a strategic partnership with Caldwell Capital. Ethan's expression brightened with sudden hope. Chairman Hahn continued. We won't be moving forward. The words landed with quiet finality. Ethan stared in disbelief. Chairman Hahn, please. This has nothing to do with business. The older man looked directly at him. It has everything to do with business. I don't invest in character after it's already been tested. I invest before. He turned toward Naomi, then bowed slightly. Miss Carter, I owe you an apology. I should have spoken sooner. Naomi offered a gentle smile. Thank you. You just did. One after another. More executives rose. Not dramatically. Not with speeches. Simply with decisions. A Canadian logistics CEO quietly walked away from Ethan's table. A Japanese investor politely excused himself. A respected hotel owner from Singapore approached Daniel instead. I believe we should continue our conversation from last month. Daniel nodded. We will. Within minutes, the table that had been the center of attention all evening looked strangely empty. No threats had been made. No one had been ordered to leave. People had simply chosen the company they wished to keep. Ethan noticed it too late. He looked around desperately. Everyone. This is ridiculous. It was just a joke. Daniel answered before anyone else could. No. It was a choice. A joke makes everyone laugh. What you did made one person smaller, so everyone else could feel bigger. He paused. But it didn't work. Daniel turned toward Naomi. I'm sorry. She looked surprised. For what? For asking you to hide. He gently touched the engagement ring resting on her finger. No one who carries themselves with this much dignity should ever feel invisible. Naomi's eyes filled with quiet emotion. She squeezed his hand. You came. I always would. The simple exchange carried more weight than every speech spoken that evening. Daniel smiled softly. Then he looked once more toward the guests gathered throughout the ballroom. If tonight changes anything, I hope it isn't the way you see Naomi. I hope it's the way you see the next person wearing a uniform. No one spoke, because every face in the room reflected the same realization. The evening had never truly been about a billionaire, or a waitress, or even an engagement. It had always been about the quiet moment every human being faces sooner or later. The moment they decide whether another person's dignity is worth protecting. And every person in that ballroom now understood exactly which choice Daniel Brooks had made from the very beginning. Real justice rarely humiliates the guilty. It simply removes the audience that once applauded them. No one said a word after Daniel Brooks introduced Naomi Carter. The ballroom seemed suspended in time. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, but even their warm light could not soften the weight settling over Ethan Caldwell's shoulders. For the first time in years, he found himself standing in a room full of influential people with nothing intelligent left to say. He forced another smile. Mr. Brooks, I owe both of you an apology. Daniel regarded him quietly. You do. Ethan took a slow breath. I crossed a line. I made assumptions. I'd like to apologize to Miss Carter. Naomi looked at him calmly. Her expression carried neither anger nor satisfaction. Only peace. She waited. Ethan finally turned toward her. I'm sorry. I spoke to you with disrespect. You didn't deserve that. Naomi held his gaze for several seconds before answering. I accept your apology. Relief briefly crossed Ethan's face. Then Naomi continued. But I hope one day you'll apologize to every person you treated that way, even when no one important was watching. The sentence landed with remarkable gentleness, yet it carried more weight than accusation ever could. Daniel looked at Naomi with quiet admiration. That was who she had always been. She never confused forgiveness with forgetting, nor kindness with weakness. Before anyone else could speak, the chairman of the hotel quietly approached. His tailored suit contrasted sharply with the concern visible on his face. Miss Carter. He bowed respectfully. On behalf of the Grand Meridian. I'm deeply sorry for what happened under our roof. Naomi smiled softly. Thank you. The chairman nodded. We're reviewing our employee protection policies immediately. No member of our staff should ever feel unsupported. Several hotel employees standing nearby exchanged grateful glances. The words clearly meant something to them. Across the ballroom, the older Korean executive walked over to Ethan. I've admired your business instincts for years. He sighed. But tonight, I admired hers more. He gestured gently toward Naomi. Because respect doesn't require wealth. It requires character. With that, he quietly walked away. One by one, other executives followed. No dramatic speeches. No public condemnation. Simply polite farewells. A Canadian CEO shook Daniel's hand before leaving. A French investor congratulated Naomi on her engagement. Two executives exchanged business cards with Daniel. Within minutes, Ethan stood almost completely alone beside the once crowded banquet table. The laughter that had surrounded him earlier had disappeared. So had nearly everyone who created it. Daniel finally stepped closer. Only close enough for Ethan to hear. I won't interfere with your business. I won't ask anyone to avoid you. I won't tell people who you are. He paused. You already showed them. Ethan lowered his eyes. Daniel extended one final courtesy. I sincerely hope this evening changes your life. Not because you lost opportunities, but because you almost lost your humanity. There was nothing left to add. Daniel turned away. Naomi gently slipped her hand into his. The diamond on her engagement ring caught the chandelier light once again. Not hidden, not concealed, exactly where it belonged. As they walked toward the ballroom entrance together, something unexpected happened. Hotel employees standing along the walls quietly began applauding. Not loudly, not theatrically. One person, then another. Soon the applause spread through the ballroom until nearly every guest had joined. It wasn't applause for wealth, or influence, or power. It was applause for quiet dignity. Naomi looked around, visibly overwhelmed. Daniel leaned toward her with a small smile. You earned every bit of this. She shook her head gently. We all chose it. Daniel followed her gaze across the room. She was right. Every person present had been given the same choice that evening, to remain silent, or to stand on the side of dignity. Some had chosen late, some had chosen early, but in the end, the room had finally remembered which choice mattered most. And Ethan Caldwell, standing alone beneath the fading applause, realized that the most expensive lesson of his life had cost him nothing more than one careless word spoken to the wrong woman. The greatest punishment for a person who lives on appearances is not losing money. It is watching respect quietly walk away, one person at a time. The applause had faded. Conversations slowly returned, but they no longer sounded the same. Something fundamental had shifted inside the Grand Meridian Ballroom. The laughter that had surrounded Ethan Caldwell all evening was gone. In its place remained an uncomfortable silence. Daniel Brooks didn't celebrate. He didn't smile in victory. He simply stood beside Naomi Carter, his hand resting gently around hers, as if reminding the room that protecting someone's dignity should never require an audience. The chairman of the hotel stepped forward once more. Miss Carter, we would like to offer you a management position if you ever choose to accept it. Several employees smiled immediately. They knew exactly how hard Naomi worked. Naomi bowed her head politely. I'm honored, but I love serving people. I don't believe honest work becomes less valuable because someone else looks down on it. The chairman smiled with genuine admiration. I suspected you might say that. He extended his hand anyway. Our offer will always remain open. Nearby, several younger hotel employees quietly wiped tears from their eyes. One whispered to another, she's exactly the same. The second nodded. That's why everyone respects her. Across the ballroom, Ethan remained standing beside his nearly empty table. His phone vibrated repeatedly. Messages from assistants, business partners, board members. He looked at the screen. Several meetings scheduled for the following week had suddenly become postponed. Another message read, we need to discuss today's incident. His shoulders dropped. For perhaps the first time in his career, he understood that reputation traveled faster than explanations. Chairman Han walked past him on the way to the exit. Ethan attempted one last conversation. Chairman, the older businessman stopped politely. I truly regret what happened. Chairman Han nodded. I believe you. Hope briefly returned to Ethan's face. Then Chairman Han continued. But regret comes after character. I invest before. With that, he quietly walked away. No anger. No insult. Only truth. Daniel noticed Ethan standing alone. He looked at Naomi. Would you mind waiting for me? She smiled gently. I know what you're going to do. He raised an eyebrow. Do you? You're going to say goodbye. Daniel laughed softly. You know me too well. He walked toward Ethan one final time. The billionaire looked exhausted now. Older somehow. Daniel stopped a respectful distance away. I don't hate you. Ethan looked surprised. I don't. No. Hatred requires carrying someone with you. I prefer to leave people where they choose to stand. Ethan lowered his eyes. I've embarrassed myself. Daniel answered quietly. No. You revealed yourself. The difference matters. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Ethan asked the question that had haunted him since the engagement ring appeared. Why didn't you stop me sooner? Daniel looked across the ballroom, toward Naomi. Because if I had interrupted after your first insult, everyone would have believed tonight was about protecting my fiancé. He looked back at Ethan. I needed them to understand it was about protecting every person who has ever been treated as less than human. Those words settled heavily between them. Daniel offered a respectful nod. Then he turned away. No final threat. No warning. No demand. Only silence. As he returned to Naomi's side, she slipped her arm gently through his. You really forgave him. Daniel looked toward the ballroom doors. I forgave him. He paused. The consequences belonged to him. Together they walked toward the exit beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers. Around them, hotel employees smiled with renewed confidence. Guests greeted Naomi by name instead of by uniform. For the first time that evening, she no longer felt invisible. She had never needed power to become extraordinary. She had only needed one thing. Someone willing to stand beside her instead of in front of her. And as the ballroom doors slowly closed behind them, everyone remaining inside understood that wealth could purchase almost anything in the world. Accept the quiet respect earned by people who choose dignity over pride. Sometimes the loudest victory is found in the quiet life that follows, when dignity no longer has to defend itself because everyone has learned to recognize it. 3 months passed. Autumn settled gently over New York, painting the trees outside the Grand Meridian Hotel in shades of amber and gold. Inside, the ballroom remained as elegant as ever. Crystal chandeliers still reflected across polished marble floors. Guests still arrived wearing designer gowns and tailored suits. Luxury had not changed. The people had. Near the employee entrance, a simple bronze plaque now hung beside the staff lounge. Respect is the first service we owe one another. No executive had requested it. No marketing department had designed it. The hotel employees had voted for it together. Naomi Carter smiled every time she walked past. She still wore the same Black Waitress uniform. She still greeted guests with the same warm smile. She still carried silver trays through crowded banquet halls with effortless grace. The only visible difference rested quietly on her left hand. Her engagement ring, no longer hidden beneath a silver chain, no longer tucked beneath fabric. It caught the light naturally as she poured coffee or arranged table settings, reminding everyone that dignity never needed permission to be seen. A young waitress named Emily hurried toward her before the evening banquet. "I have table 16 tonight. They look intimidating." Naomi smiled. "They're just people." Emily laughed nervously. "What if one of them looks down on me?" Naomi gently adjusted the young woman's collar. "Then don't look down on yourself. People can only take the respect you surrender." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "I'll remember that." Across the ballroom, Daniel Brooks sat quietly near the windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. He wasn't there as a businessman, or as someone powerful. He had simply come to pick up the woman he loved after her shift. A cup of tea rested untouched beside him. Every few minutes, he looked up from his book just long enough to watch Naomi moving gracefully through the ballroom. She noticed. Their eyes met. She smiled. He smiled back. No words were necessary. Min Jae approached carrying a tablet. "Boss." The final report. Daniel accepted it. The screen displayed a brief summary. Caldwell Capital has lost 3 major international partnerships. Corporate ethics investigations remain ongoing. Daniel quietly locked the screen. Min Jae raised an eyebrow. "That's all." Daniel handed the tablet back. "Consequences don't need spectators." Min Jae smiled. "I suppose not." Meanwhile, the hotel chairman crossed the ballroom carrying a small envelope. He stopped beside Naomi. "This arrived for you." She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. There was no signature. Only one sentence. "Thank you for teaching me that respect should never depend on status. I'm trying to become a better man." Naomi folded the note quietly. She didn't ask who had sent it. She already knew. She simply placed it inside her apron pocket. Not because it erased the past, because it acknowledged it. As her shift finally ended, Daniel stood and offered her his hand. "Ready?" She slipped her fingers into his. "Always." Together they walked toward the hotel entrance beneath the warm evening lights. Employees wished them good night. Guests smiled as they passed. No one looked at Naomi and saw only a waitress anymore. They saw a woman who had refused to trade her dignity for someone else's approval. Outside, the city pulsed with endless movement. Luxury cars rolled past. Office lights shimmered against the skyline. Thousands of strangers hurried home carrying stories no one else would ever know. Daniel looked at Naomi. "You know, you changed more lives than you realize." She shook her head softly. "I didn't. I just refused to let someone else decide my worth." Daniel smiled. Perhaps that was exactly how real change began. Not with power, not with wealth, but with one ordinary person quietly refusing to become less than they already were. And that night, beneath the lights of a city that rarely stopped to notice ordinary people, the world remembered something money could never purchase. What dignity truly looks like.